You guys have such amazing music. It's wonderful. So I'm going to start with another story. When I was in grade school, language warning, I overheard one child call another one a slut. Having never heard that word, I went home to ask my dad what it meant. My dad told me this story. A long time ago, he said, there was no such thing as birth control. So when a woman had sex, she had a baby. That was a big deal, takes a lot of work to raise a baby, and the daddies of the babies did not always stick around to help. So the women got together and they decided to solve the problem by everyone agreeing nobody would have any sex without something called marriage first, which was like a contract that would ensure the daddies would stick around. It was like a kind of unionization, my dad explained. I didn't know what slut meant, maybe, but like any decent grade school child, I knew about community organizing. I knew about the labor movement. Being aware of your collective bargaining power, well, that is just an essential life skill. My dad was not a UU, but it was no accident that he raised one. Anyway, the women, according to my dad, agreed that none of them would have any sex except under contract, and this would ensure everyone's survival. In order to enforce that the fathers would choose this contract, every woman had to agree not to have sex outside of marriage. If they did, they would put themselves at risk and they would also put the whole system into jeopardy. Then my dad went off on a metaphor about not buying a cow if you could get the milk for free, and my mother intervened at this point. She shut the whole conversation down. Anyway, slut was the name for a woman who was crossing the picket line, basically. And he said that the word persisted even after the advent of birth control because some people were a little backwards and hadn't adjusted yet. They didn't know that in modern times, sex should be about consent and joy and using condoms. Seriously, it was no accident that I became a UU. So, as a tool for navigating the playground as an 8-year-old, this story was not so helpful. But the set of values that underlied that perspective were incredibly helpful as I entered teenagerhood. I entered those years with a firm belief that anyone trying to define anyone else as a slut, or as frigid, for that matter, didn't know what they were talking about. They were not evil so much as misguided with a poor understanding of anthropology. I would recognize these values, by the way, years later when I trained to facilitate the UU Our Whole Lives Sexuality curriculum, because they are the UU values of sex as well. Joy and consent and diversity. Values like that we're all different creatures sexually, and you need to know how to listen to your own internal compass. It is, after all, the only way to know which things are right for you, if any things, and when and with who. There are a lot of questions, and we are in the business of tools, not answers, when it comes to sexuality education. It's a very similar thing to our attitude around theology, really. We inherit a lot of stuff from our ancestors. Not all of it is worth keeping. Each person needs to figure it out for themselves. We are in the business of tools, not answers. So when Gary and Maureen and I were trying to figure out what to do with regards to our new family, the values I was raised with were a good guide for tackling those questions. And I understand now why it's no accident that the UU Church accepted our family when no other church would do that. We were actually pretty traditional by UU standards. I am fascinated by the specifics of what is considered traditional or not, or monogamous or not. It was very common at this time for people to explain to me that our relationship was actually a monogamous one because Maureen was so sick she couldn't be a real wife. I always thought this was quite a cruel thing to say, but I came to understand that people weren't trying to be cruel. They were trying to validate my place in the marriage and make me real, because at some subconscious level, they felt like there could be only one. This stuff isn't clear-cut. And even within fully monogamous relationships, the lines are not very clear. Some people see flirting as cheating. Others see having close friends of another gender as cheating. This is often even true when you're bisexual, which has never made sense to me. There's culture to be contended with around this too. There are a zillion rules of propriety in Jane Austen novels that I pored over as a teenager. There are places still where letting a man see your hair is cheating for a woman, even today. I always find it interesting how people often see monogamy as a natural law of relationships, but they also see their particular sub-branch definition of monogamy as the natural law of the universe. It's not unlike how it works with God, actually. In the world my father grew up in, the rules of both God and sex were very strict. Women had to wear modest clothing, dresses, long hair, no makeup. Anything beyond that was considered a sexual overture. Men could cheat by having the wrong thoughts, and you absolutely positively could not be gay. In the world my dad was able to see as a child, being gay was always linked to coercion or mental illness. Because it was so disastrous for anyone to find out you were gay, people were never out of the closet. The only examples my dad saw were people who had either so many mental health issues they couldn't keep a secret, or that was a situation where assault was uncovered. He had no other examples. He grew up believing homosexuality was sick and linked to child abuse because that's what he was told, and that was the only thing he ever saw any evidence of. So my father earned his open-mindedness. He approached practices that made him very uncomfortable, and he asked himself where he learned his discomfort. He cross-examined the values he inherited. He went out, he sought new experiences and new information. And I benefited from his bravery and his change in values. I was taught it was my choice, not Jesus's choice, what I should do with my body. And this came in handy when I found myself interested in boys, but it came way more in handy when I found myself also interested in girls. And I knew that was fine. I also didn't respond to my clearly different feelings about monogamy with any kind of shame, because I'd been taught that the thing that was wrong about cheating was the lying part, the part where you didn't do the things that you agreed to, the betrayal of trust. And so as I started to date, I was careful about what I agreed to. Now, I want to pause for a moment for a couple of definitions and disclaimers. Firstly, I'm going to use the word polyamorous in reference to myself. This means practice of being in relationship with more than one person, more or less, which I currently am and also have been for many points in my life. Polyamory is one type of non-monogamy. They aren't actually interchangeable, but I will use them as though they are for the sake of simplicity. One last disclaimer, like with homosexuality, people sometimes respond to learning about polyamory with, but I wouldn't want to do that. During the gay marriage debate, you'll remember people had to be reassured over and over again that we were only asking for gay marriage for the gay people. The other marriages could continue as they always had. It's the same with monogamy. Most people don't like the idea of their partner being with someone else, and it feels awful to them. And I believe people shouldn't be in relationships that feel awful to them. I am pro-monogamy, but I am arguing for people's freedom to have options. Because that freedom matters no matter what a person chooses. It mattered that I married a man, but I did it because I chose to, not because Jesus said it had to be a boy and a woman would mean I went to hell. I wasn't ashamed of who I was. I also chose the extent to which I would be monogamous. I didn't believe my polyamorous tendencies made me a bad person, but I did understand I needed to be honest and keep my commitments. And I did understand that for Gary, certain things were not negotiable. I agreed to those things. I kept my agreements. So I'm only arguing here for the value of intentionality in our choices. If you're new to the idea of non-monogamy, I want to recognize that this is a lot. And if you can, I hope you will do what my dad did as he wrestled with the idea of homosexuality. Keep in mind that what you've been taught may not be the whole picture because so many people are still closeted. Because my work gives me the luxury of being out, I hear from so many of these people. They write me notes about thinking how they were the only ones, about fears of losing their jobs, fears of losing their children. All of the things that my lesbian friends, who are a generation older than I am, were afraid of when they were contemplating coming out. All of the things I never had to be afraid of because those women did the hard work of facing down prejudice and carving out a space for me. This is work we haven't done yet around non-monogamy. Poly people are still mostly invisible, so the picture isn't clear. Just like my dad's images of same-sex relationships always involved troubling people or situations, people's common perceptions of non-monogamy are also very narrow. The first thing people think about is someone that they know who was outed for cheating, which is not the same thing at all. Or maybe they think of the free love of the 1960s, which, as I understand it, was somewhat creepy and a little bit patriarchal, although I was not there. I'm only going from stories. And as I understand it, a lot of things were weirdly patriarchal in the 60s. Or maybe people who have seen both of those tell me that it's different now, but I can't speak from experience. Maybe people are also thinking about people they know whose marriages were struggling and tried swinging as a last ditch to save the relationship. That's another form of non-monogamy. This never works, of course, because you can't save a relationship by changing the model. And so they often blame the divorce on the experiment. There are so many negative stories that spring to people's minds. And the stable and happy polyamorous relationships are still, for the most part, in the closet. Like gay relationships in the 1950s when my dad grew up, those people exist. They are living healthy lives, apart from the challenges of being in the closet. Polyamorous people are present in your life, even if you don't know it. They're present in roughly similar numbers to same-sex couples. And if you don't know them, or you only know one or two of them, it's likely because the people in your life don't feel safe to tell you the truth. Which maybe isn't a bad thing. Maybe you don't want to have those conversations. I mean, isn't what people do in the privacy of their homes best left there? Sort of. If the two gay guys beside me in church turn to me and start describing what they do in the bedroom, yeah, that would be best left there. But if they're holding hands or if they refer to one another as husbands, well, that's not sharing about their sex lives, is it? That's just being honest that they exist as people and that they are connected and telling the truth about that connection. Normalizing all of that, making it no longer about sex, was a really key part of getting legal protections for same-sex couples. It was about protecting jobs and custody of children, and these are things that matter. But it's also about more than legalities. It's about standing up in front of people to be honest about who you are and who you love, which is an important part of the expression of our humanity. If it weren't, we wouldn't need any weddings, gay or straight. That's the reason that I think of the moment Pat stepped in to help me as the moment I became a UU. There's a reason poly people ask me all the time about Unitarian Universalism, because the act of accepting people who are not normally accepted is a huge, powerful opportunity to do good. We are needed, which I believe makes it a Unitarian Universalist issue. But it is more than that, more than just need. There are a lot of needs. Think about the values I was taught that helped me navigate my relationship to monogamy. Those are our values. They're not just our sex ed values either. What we teach about sexuality is an extension of what we teach about spirituality. We teach diversity is our strength. You can pray and I can meditate. You can be straight and I can be queer. We can want different things, we can do different things, and it's okay. We also teach consent is critical. You can pray all you like, but please don't pressure me into doing it. We teach that we're all drawn to different things, and that's okay. We also teach that honesty is valuable, that it's okay to tell the truth. In spirituality, it's okay to tell the truth about the idea that God exists, or your doubts that God exists, or your thoughts that maybe she might. It's okay with all of that. We teach it's also okay to be honest about being gay. And when a shaking hand lights a candle to come out of the closet, our eyes fill with tears of warmth and support. The moment when someone finally tells the truth about who they are is a UU moment, whether it has to do with spirituality or sexuality or anything else. And we teach critical thinking, things like questioning what you were taught in Sunday school. Also, things like that would be a theological version with regards to LGBT things, gender, questioning what you were taught about what real men are supposed to be like. We teach freedom of conscience and compassion. And these values are as much a core of my sexuality as my spirituality. When Pat said love makes a family, she made it sound really simple. Had I looked in the Welcoming Congregation handbook, I'd have seen that it was more complicated. We've had to work, many of us, to earn our open-mindedness. We had to learn about things one at a time. First gay and lesbian people, then bisexual people and trans people. We've constantly expanded our horizons. It happens slowly, but we do expand them. Whoever you love, whoever you are, love makes a family. Before I conclude, I want to say I have to emphasize this is just my opinion as one Unitarian Universalist. I should also mention that my views are only my own as a poly person. Like you poly peoples have so many things that we don't agree about. Like UUs, when one of us speaks for all of us, the rest are sitting there with little asterisks going on in their minds. So keep that in mind. There are more than 10 of us here. And so I assume I'm speaking to at least one non-monogamous person statistically. And I hope you will forgive me if I didn't get things quite right. And while you are at it, I hope you will forgive me for framing everything in this talk as though everyone that I was speaking to this morning was monogamous. I erased you in that act, and I want to correct it as I conclude by speaking directly to you. If you're in the closet as a non-monogamous person, or as anything else I might not have mentioned this morning that takes place among consenting adults, I see you. I only speak for me, but I want to say, I know you are waiting. I know how painful it can be. I am doing everything I can to move towards a world where you can be honest. It is my dream that when you are ready to come out, we will be here waiting for you with a warm welcome. I don't think that we are yet, but I don't think it's fair to rush it. People need space to work things through. But I accept you as you are, and I am not the only one who does. It's my vision that someday when you do come out, we will be there, saying the same simple and beautiful things we have said for years. Things that were said to me that everyone deserves to hear. Love makes a family. Whoever you are, whoever you love, however you love is okay. You are enough, just as you are. And how could anyone ever tell you anything else? And now Dick and Kathy will lead us in a song.